At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Get the home field advantage every time with Fairfield by Marriott, official hotel partner of the NCAA. Whether you're a student athlete working toward your championship dreams or your team's biggest fan, Fairfield by Marriott has everything you need to get ready for game day. From comfortable guest rooms to complimentary hot breakfast, Fairfield is part of the Marriott Bonvoy portfolio of hotels and official hotel partner of the NCAA. Visit fairfield.marriott.com to book your next game day stay.
Everyone deserves to enjoy a McRib at least once in their lifetime. Because when you're this saucy and tangy and tasty, a life without one creates a serious case of FOMO. The McRib is back.
Don't miss the classic you've been craving. Get a McRib, Filet-O-Fish, or Big Mac, and get another for $1. Or mix and match. Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts and Q&A lets us be more creative on another level. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Welcome into The Verge, a show which covers the Baltimore Orioles minor leagues. The Verge is part of BSL Radio. Baltimore Sports and Life is dedicated to analysis and discussion on the Orioles, Baltimore Ravens, and the University of Maryland. The site has a team of writers providing coverage of those teams and houses live streaming content weekly. Join the conversations at the message board, like BSL on Facebook, and follow BSL on Twitter.
Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. On today's episode, we're joined by a special guest as Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs is coming on to talk about his recent Orioles top prospects list over at the site. We're really excited to have Eric on, and we will get to him in a moment. But first, On the Verge is brought to you courtesy of Mercer Floor and Home Carpet One. Mercer is a third-generation family business. It was established in 1959 and is located on Main Street in beautiful historic downtown Westminster, Maryland. For all of your flooring needs, think Mercer. So I'll introduce our guest tonight. He is the lead prospect analyst at Fangraphs.com. He has put together several excellent lists over the offseason, including his recent countdown of the Baltimore Orioles' top 45 prospects. We mentioned that on our show last week, but now we're going to take an extensive opportunity here to really dive into that list with Eric Longenhagen, who was kind enough to join us tonight. Eric, how are you?
Doing pretty well, guys. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Good. Just chilling in Tempe. It's spring training season, and so a lot of fresh new information flowing. In the last 12 to 18 months, this is the stretch when it's been easiest to source real time stuff about prospects en masse, basically. Especially now that Baseball Savants expanded their pitch tracking during spring training to a lot of other ballparks in Florida. So a lot of great information coming in, and obviously you can get sort of a secondhand video look at guys right now during this time of year. So it's been that stuff in college baseball. I'm very, very busy.
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, how does it feel to be back at the ballpark now?
I've only gone to a couple spring training games. I've been trying to do it in very efficient clusters, I guess. It's not a thing I want to do like I would ideally do in a typical year, which is just go day after day after day. This is really the time of year in Arizona where it's the best to live here. The weather's incredible, and all the colleges are here in February, because it's warm. So you end up with like TCU and Vanderbilt and stuff. And then obviously half of professional baseball is here. But I've been trying to tick off, like, if I can do a double up in a day and then stay home for a couple of days, just to make sure that I'm asymptomatic and all that stuff. So, I feel privileged to be able to go to the ballpark at all. And I tend to feel pretty safe at most of the ballparks, but I'm not inoculated yet. And I just, I really don't want to give COVID to anybody. That's just my worst nightmare. I feel like I'd probably be okay dealing with it on my own. Don't know that for sure, but it's just giving it to somebody else is the thing that is like an unimaginable feeling. And so I'm just trying not to do that. So I've been, doubling up here and there, hitting a midday game and then a night game, and then going back to ground here at home in Tempe for a couple days until I feel in the clear again.
Nice.
So it's good that you're able to at least see some baseball this spring, and hope, as I know we're all hoping, that things will get better over the next few months to get some return to normalcy. We have you on tonight to really talk about the Orioles, and the question that we wanted to start off with is kind of what is at the genesis of every move the Orioles make, which is the Mike Elias regime taking another step in this rebuild. How would you say that the farm system has changed since he took over the team a little more than 2 years ago now?
Right. I mean, I guess if you're talking about the way that they went about the first stages of the rebuild really began before he got there. It'd be interesting to know if he could have been the one to have traded Manny Machado, what would that prospect package have been like coming back? I do think that the emphasis on depth, the emphasis on getting multiple pieces at a time, almost invariably during this last little while, has really exploded the depth of the system and made it so, and this seems to be pervasive throughout all of baseball, Texas has started to really operate this way too, is let's get as many guys as we like as possible. Don't have to love, but just let's get a bunch of guys that we like and apply these sound developmental techniques to them, the kind of stuff that worked really, really well in this case when we were in Houston, right? And I think to look at especially how the pitching has developed in Houston over time should give you a lot of confidence as an Orioles fan that's going to work, that when you get a Zach Peak, Isaac Mattson, Kyle Brnovich, that one of those guys at least is going to become a real major league arm, a real part of your pitching staff. And so if that's just applied to every deal where you're getting like an extra arm or two as a second or third piece in every deal, that, you're going to really start to see the seeds of that reaped 2-3 years down the line as those guys have been in the system for a while. And obviously 2020 complicates that. And I think that there are probably some guys in the system who, even the hitters like Gunnar Henderson, if he just has a 2020 season, then maybe he's just a universal top 100 prospect. That's a guy who, because he's a corner player, you'll want to see him perform statistically to have that confidence that he's going to hit and be able to profile there. And we just don't have that for a lot of the corner prospects across all of baseball. And so I think their guys have been punished by that. And then I think the other thing to note is that the operation in the draft room has to some extent mimicked what occurred in Houston too, right? And it's like old SNL sketches. I can only ever remember the good ones. I don't remember any boring sketches that Chris Farley's in. I just remember Matt Foley and stuff, right? But the Carlos Correa draft, when they cut a deal with Correa, it was going to be, it was him, Buxton, I think maybe Max Fried was in their mix too, if I'm remembering that correctly. And whoever was going to take the lowest number of those three guys is who they were going to take 1-1, and they were going to reallocate that savings to later in the draft. And they did that with Correa, and obviously they hit there big, right? And then also use that savings to sign Lance McCullers, who they wouldn't have been able to sign had they not cut at 1. And now we're talking about Baltimore doing that with Heston Kjerstad. He was part of, for me, a big fat tier of 50 future value guys in the middle of the top 10 picks in the draft who could be had for the lowest bonus. And then that allowed them to roll that into Kobe Mayo, who I really, really like. Carter Baumler, who again, just 6'2", 180 breaking ball, low 90s. Put him in this developmental machine and see what comes out. Like, I like this approach. And then they got 2 good college hitters there as well. So they really diversified the mix that they got. And I really liked their draft approach as well. So, yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. You're more likely to end up with a bunch of role players in some of the, Jahmai Jones, Tyler Nevin types of guys than you are, I think, slam dunk everyday players. But again, if you're acquiring them in volume, then somewhere along the line, one of those guys is going to pop and be, a pillar of your org for the long term. So, yeah, I like the way they've gone about it. Can't say the same for the way the scouting staff maybe seems to be developing. Some of the stuff that happened in Houston is definitely happening in Baltimore now. Certainly during the pandemic, there are lots of good reasons to fixate on video and limit your scope to that. And there's certainly an efficiency component to doing it that way that I think is a real positive. But I think having a lot of the old scout guard around, having people go to the field, allows you to source dope and rumor and all sorts of other valuable intel that doing it solely on video does not allow for. And that as more and more teams do things this way, in part because of, at the behest of ownership to cut costs, that the only competitive advantage will be having those old guys at the ballpark talking to the assistant coaches who they've known for 40 years. So I think it's a short-sighted approach to kind of rejigger the scouting staff the way that they've started to, although they do have people out here at spring training games and stuff. It's not like they're totally scoutless. But I would be cautious if I were to repeat stuff from Houston. I would select some of it and not others.
So what would you say right now is the biggest strength of the system?
I guess that's a good question. I guess, Adley Rutschman, like, you can't go wrong. Just like the strength of the system is one of the best guys. And then I do think that it's going to end up being some defensive versatility on the infield. I think that Taron Vavra is going to play all over the place and he can really hit. And those two things, I think, portend a long big league future for that guy. Jordan Westberg is going to be the same thing. Anthony Servideo has a bunch of multi-positional experience too, just because there were so many other good shortstops at Ole Miss while he was there. So he sort of backed into that. And then, I just think they're up to middle contact bats and depth in pitching. And the rest is sort of going to take care of itself. And I think that the depth that they've built over a short period of time is probably one of the other, things I would identify as a strength. And then it's not like they're taking a bunch of numbers only type, like you see some of these big bodied college masher type guys like Aaron Sabato at North Carolina, Brent Rooker at Mississippi State, the two guys that the Twins drafted. And you look at them and say, that's an analytic driven pick. It's a guy with a lot of measurable power. And you would expect a team like this to do that type of thing too. And maybe there's been some of that, but more if I look at a guy like Jordan Westberg, or a Taron Vavra or a Kyle Stowers, I'm looking at good athletes who need polish, who need some sort of help. And I think that that's speaking to an integration of the scouting side of things there, which I do think that's a reason to do things on video and sort of warehouse things in one tightly knit place, because I think that it allows for this type of communication to be easier. But you have your scouting staff, and then the dev piece gets integrated into it. So you're looking at a player and saying, here's what he can do. Here's what might need to change. And having your dev people in there to say, yeah, I can fix that. What I'll do is this, reinforces confidence that type of guy is the right pick. And I think that there's clear evidence of that throughout the system too. Hudson Haskin, his swing is jacked up. It's hideous, but he has great underlying feel for contact and other tools. He runs well. And so you take a guy like that who's got talent that you feel more confident that you can apply relevant developmental technique to. And I think that, that's another part of the system that seems to run through.
Nice. So I think Orioles fans are pretty jacked up about this farm system now, just compared to recent years. And a lot of the hype might be a little bit too much at times. We get a guy like Natalie Rushman in the system, and Orioles fans, of course, are going to fall in love with him. And the top of this list that you have. But are there any like glaring weaknesses you see in this minor league system for the Orioles right now that you'd like to see them address in the short run?
Well, one of the things that I think is going to be interesting to see how it develops across baseball, and then especially in a place like this, is how the pitch mix, like biodiversity, if it has an impact on the effectiveness over time. Like you see in a lot of systems, and especially in this system, that those backspinning rising fastballs, they're the soup du jour, right? But if Major League Baseball, pro baseball starts to select for that trait more than it should, and so many of the guys, especially if they're being trained from amateur baseball lower and lower and lower when they're younger and younger and younger onward, to have a vertical arm slot or to have a low release point and create this flat angle on their fastballs with a lot of backspin, if that's all hitters see for their whole lives or for more of their pro careers or, elite amateur ball in college, if that's what they're constantly used to seeing, does that have a long-term impact as to whether or not that type of pitch works as well anymore? Because when you have, guys throwing from all different kinds of arm slots with all different types of fastball shapes, and then you have the Verlanders of the world ripping, tough angled backspinning four-seamers past you, it probably plays a little different than if everybody's trying to do that. So I wonder if there will be a biodiversity issue in this system soon. I think that some of what like the Rays have done, what the Brewers have done, although that comes from Houston too, right? What they've done to create a whole bunch of different weird looks out of their bullpen throughout the course of the game. That's the type of thing that I'd like to see Baltimore start to do. Obviously, those type of pitchers aren't typically valued in the draft or in trade in the same type of way that a guy with like power playing stuff is. There's just much more confidence in that backspinning fastball, vertical action breaking ball now than there has ever been, and much more than there is compared to other types of pitchers. So I think that getting some of these weirdo sidearm type guys, I mean, Zach Lowther is sort of that type of guy, but having those guys at scale, I think, will be important. I think that some of the other teams who I think are good at this have started to branch out in that way where they're like, yeah, give me Eric Yardley and I'll trade you a comp pick for Alex Claudio. And what's another one? Zach Pop is one that is sort of let get away in Baltimore. So it'll be, well, maybe, but I think he was supposed to pitch today. He might be throwing right now. That might be interesting to know how that looks right now. Given that when he was traded in the Manny Machado deal, it was all right. Well, if this guy stays healthy, then maybe he's Brandon Lee. It's a turbo sinker guy with a low slot. So yeah, I think that I'd like to see a little bit more diversification among the pitching prospects that they've tended toward.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're all pretty upset we got Pop taken from us. So
yeah, and you guys were on the other end of that. Doesn't it? It has to feel good to be on the other end of that, though, right? Like that you have enough depth that someone thinks, yeah, we'll take one of the Orioles guys in the Rule 5, and you're not taking Jose Mesa's kid and Nestor Cortez and, like using like 3 Rule 5 picks in a year on guys who don't stick.
Yeah, it feels weird. I'm not used to that.
So I guess with your list, we shared your list as soon as it was put up on Fangraphs. And one of the first comments that we got for it was, why are there no Samuel Basallo, Michael Hernandez, 2 guys that the Orioles just signed in the international market? Was that just because timing, that market, the deadline being pushed back a little bit when the list came out? Or if so, what are your thoughts on those 2 guys, just kind of generally speaking, since, international prospects, a lot of information is harder to come by.
And we're not used to that either.
Yeah, right. So certainly some of the Orioles guys I have seen in person, some of them I haven't. The way that I started to do things internationally is to focus on the very, very top of that market and not try to go super duper deep. Obviously, the way a 15-year-old, 16-year-old develops physically over the course of just a couple of months can be pretty explosive, right? You can really change physically as an athlete over the course of just 7-8 months at that age. Guys have growth spurts or whatever. You give a kid $1 million and he comes from an impoverished place, and baseball teams haven't really been good at helping guys understand what to do with all that money all of a sudden and how to adapt to a new culture when they're coming here quickly. So it's a very volatile place to try to, rank talent. And so, yeah, like the Orioles guys, they're okay. We're talking about guys who are about, 7 figures, low 7 figures types. And Hernandez is of that well-rounded, projectable frame group who 8 months from now, you might go, hey, look at this guy. He's 6'2", 170. Now you're looking at, at maturity, he's going to be 6'3", 205, 210, maybe have 2 more grades worth of power, or he might always be slender, might be a lock to stay at shortstop. And your confidence in those 2 things might change over the course of a couple of months. So he's just in that developmental ball of clay. The actions at shortstop are good. And, you just sort of see what happens. That type of guy I'll put, if I have enough information on him, if I've seen him in person, which Hernandez I actually may have at some point. I think he might have been I might have an old roster here that has him in Scottsdale, and I have notes that I didn't identify before the list went up. But yeah, like he's on the outside looking in for me right now, and some of that is just because of insufficient information on my behalf, basically. And who's the player? Is this the catcher, right?
Yeah, Samuel Basallo.
Right. Yeah, just don't have a whole lot on him. I think is he Venezuelan? I've had a real hard time, especially during the pandemic, getting any information on some of the Venezuelan players, at all. Some of the countries in Latin America were super duper locked down for months and months at a time. And some of even the pro prospects who have been around for a while were stuck inside for several months, and in a way that has impacted their conditioning over the course of checking in with the developmental personnel with the team over the course of pandemic. So yeah, I've really struggled to get info on some of the Venezuelan guys. I actually think that for the first time this cycle that I had, I'm just looking now to see how many other Venezuelan guys are even on the list. So Jesus Galiz and Wilman Diaz, who signed with the Dodgers. Galiz was supposed to sign with the Yankees, and then is one of those guys who was subject to some of the weird, unfortunate COVID circumstances. Like MLB wouldn't allow teams to trade bonus pool space anymore. And so the Yankees couldn't fit all of the guys in their signing pool because they had planned on trading for bonus pool space. And so they cut Galiz loose. They had like a $2 million agreement with him, or maybe it was 1.2. But he ended up signing for $600K with the Dodgers. Yeah, I've got the Borgoya kid for next year, but I just don't have a whole lot on the Venezuelan kids.
That'll be interesting to follow. So obviously most prognosticators have Adley Rutschman to be major league ready at some point this season, but do you think the Orioles will start the clock on him at all, considering they don't really intend to be competitive this year?
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess I don't really know. I think that if some real repercussions, I would hope that they look at what happened with Chris Bryant and the Cubs, and also what happened with JJ Watt and the Texans, because Rutschman just kind of looks like JJ a little bit, actually. But he's also that type of guy, right? Like Rutschman's the best college hitting prospect I've scouted. And he is big league ready, certainly defensively. Do I think that you drop him into the lineup tomorrow and he'd be peak Adley Rutschman? No. Could you point to like Mike Zunino and Joey Bart as recent examples of why you should be more careful with him? Yes. But I would tend to look at the Chris Bryant situation and then look at Adley Rutschman and say, I want this guy to be a pillar of our organization for the next 10 years, even if he's not great. If something happens and he gets concussed over and over again, or breaks his hand, or whatever, right? Like catching, you take a beating. Even if that dilutes his offensive production and he ends up being closer to Wieters, just because of this guy's personality, like Brian Dawkins in Philly, or just that type of guy who just won around, and you want him to be on good terms with the org. And so I would be more inclined to put this kid in the big league sooner than later, even if it's suboptimal from a like retention standpoint. Because honestly, dude, like if you don't compete during the life of Adley Rutschman's tenure in Baltimore, it doesn't matter that you have this extra year on the back end of his service time clock. Like, you're just going to get fired. So if you don't compete, you have like your 5-year window or whatever it is, and maybe some of these new age of executives are good at, they certainly are better at job security because so much of it is budgetary. But from a performance standpoint, like, you just better be damn good long before that 7th year of team control can come to fruition, right? So I think there are a myriad of reasons, both practical and ethical, that they should just, maybe not an opening day or whatever. Certainly, I think Adley Rutschman is one of the best 30 catchers on the planet right now, bar none. Like, he deserves to be a big league starter from day one. If you want to take a look at what the hitting is like and sort of ease him into big league stuff from a hitting standpoint, because you're scared of what happened with Zunino and you're scared of what it seems like it might happen with Joey Bart, and you want to slow play things rather than try to ask him to take that leap that some of these guys haven't been able to bridge, then I think that's justifiable. But at some point in 2021, I think he should be up.
Let me ask you this, just talking about Rutschman real quick. I looked this up not long ago, and it doesn't seem like there's much of a precedence for catchers getting a contract extension at the beginning of their career. Salvador Perez was one of the only examples I could find. Do you think that Rutschman could buck that trend and get an extension early on? Do you think that's something the Orioles aren't really going to entertain?
Yeah, that's another good question. I don't have any specific intel on any of this, so anything I say is very speculative.
So it's a fact. Let's hear it.
I think that he's certainly, again, like, absolutely the kind of guy who I'd want to have around for a really long time. If you look at what the Braves have done with Albies and Acuna, although some of that's on their agent, and what like Arizona has done with Ketel Marte, who's got a pretty, before he really exploded, he had an extension. Like, I don't know. And, the Longoria in with the Rays, I think that there are reasons to explore it. Certainly, I think that it's more, if I'm lining up the risk, then someone like Longoria or Marte is less likely to, the spectrum of risk goes from DH, where you're just hitting every day, to pitcher where you might break at any moment, right? Like, if we were talking about Casey Mize, I'd go, no, thank you. No extension. But for this guy, he's somewhere on that spectrum, closer towards the middle, just because it's not like he's playing third base or whatever, where he's just a position player and is less likely to get hurt than a pitcher, but he is a catcher. And again, they just absolutely take a beating back there. Their thighs and their knees and their hamstrings and their forearms, like, they just get bludgeoned with baseballs. And it wouldn't surprise me if over the course of these first 6 or 7 years that he has with the team, that he spends a bunch of time on the injured list at some point, just because that's what happens. And so maybe if a team is really taking a pragmatic look at that, they would say, yeah, that kind of scares me. But having him in place at a reasonable number also means that you can reallocate some of that budget that ownership is allowing you to use to other pieces. And then but that could be said of just leaving him on his rookie deal too. So yeah, I think if you can buy out a couple of years of free agency, that's essentially what you're predicting then, right? Is when he's a free agent, do we still want to be in? Are we confident enough to be in? And as far as Rutschman as a talent and a person goes, I would be. And then it's just about understanding the risk of catchers. And then really the way to answer the question then on our own would be to go, all right, how many catchers are good from age 24 and then in perpetuity? And I would guess that number is pretty low.
Yeah, that's a good point. Moving way down the list, Dan Zimborski's Zips predicts Kevin Smith to have the highest WAR amongst pitchers in the organization for 2021. And yet he's all the way down at 35 on your list. Can both of these things be true at the same time?
No. No, one of us will be correct. This is where, and Smith is an interesting player, and maybe he's a good example of, hey, you said you wanted different looks mixed in. Here's a guy who does that, right? It's a lower slot guy who is in that Josh Fleming Rays sort of mold. And the thing that Zips can't capture that I can is how mightily Kevin Smith struggled to get that breaking ball to his glove side at the alt site, right? Like that's one thing that I know and can factor into the way I'm thinking about this, that Zips just cannot, because it's looking at performance. And so, yeah, there are definitely people who love Kevin Smith. You can see how the way his stuff works, which is like this, like teams like that now. And especially if the movement on your fastball tailing and your slider sweeping has a huge difference, it seems to be a thing that some teams are growing interested in. And I bet Kevin Smith is on that list, but you still have to execute that back foot breaking ball to righties and that glove side chase it breaking ball to lefties if you're Kevin Smith. And he did not do that at the alt site. Definitely did not. And so that's why I slid him down to where he was. And I bet Zips loves him because of how he's performed, which I'm going to look up right now. So there are a couple Kevin Smiths. All right, so there's one with the Jays. Right, so yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it, 10 Ks per 9 in 18 at low A. I guess that would be rookie ball. That's the New York Penn League. 23 innings, an 0.76 ERA, a 2.43 FIP. He had a 2.63 FIP at high A the next year over 17 starts. And absolutely carved at double A over 6 starts. Well, no, he did not. He was fine. 8 per 9. They pushed him. And then over the course of 6 starts at double A, it took a little bit of a dip. And then let's see, the data I have from 19 on him I'm just going to look up some fastball data that I sourced from back in 2019 that is still relevant just because there wasn't a 2020. And Kevin Smith, 87 to 90, touching 92 with a lot of spin for someone who throws only that hard. Okay, about 2450 RPMs on average. It's a very low slot and axis, so you're going to get a lot of tail and sink on a fastball like this. And he does have quite a bit of both. Actually, not as much sink as you'd think. It has really a little bit of vertical carry and a lot of tail. Only a 10% swinging strike rate on that fastball, so that's about average. And again, that's at like high A and double A. So below average velocity, but average swinging strike rate on that fastball. So it's definitely pretty interesting. But as far as him like being the top guy in the org, no, I don't think that's going to happen. But that's interesting though, right? Like that's a thing that had I known that before you said that, then maybe he's not 35th on the list. And maybe I go, oh, so if Zips thinks his performance is at this level, maybe I should adjust this a little bit.
So two players that we have talked about a lot recently because they were acquired over the offseason are Garrett Stallings and Jahmai Jones. Both came over from the Angels. We kind of took the contrarian view at the time in liking the Iglesias trade and liking that return. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on Stallings. And then Jones, should we hear a lot about his swing being tinkered with? And he's so far gotten off to a good start in camp. What kind of player do you see him being?
Yeah, again, I think especially Stallings, you're looking at a foundation of pitchability that you're hoping to apply dev to, because the thing that teams just seem to be able to do most consistently now from a developmental perspective is tease out that velocity. That's just the thing that they can do now. Driveline's not famous for making guys throw strikes. They tease out velo. And so I like Stallings quite a bit. Until you see the velo, you can't go, on a prospect list. You can't just anticipate it, right? Because, all right, well, now he's an Oriole, so up he goes. But there is the possibility of that. And then Jahmai, Yeah, his swing has been goofed with a lot. Like it's just been the case for a lot of the Angels prospects over the last couple of years. I'm not a huge fan of it. Not that I'm anti-swing change, or that I don't think that some of the data-driven reasons to try to change someone's swing are valid. But I think that a lot of the players, this is a situation where there was not discussion. There doesn't seem to be cohesion between at least not logical cohesion in my mind, between the scouting staff and the dev staff. Because I love the players the Angels have drafted. I love Jordan Adams. I love Jahmai Jones. I love Brandon Marsh and Kyron Paris and Trent DeVoe. Like I really like the athletes that the Angels have put into their system over the last handful of years. But a lot of them, and some of them explicitly so, are raw two-sport athletes. Like Joe Adele is just still very raw. And Marsh was an all-state wide receiver. And Jordan Adams wasn't even going to be a baseball player until NHSI, where he looked great. And then suddenly it was like, how much would we pay this guy to not play North Carolina wide receiver? And so Jahmai is like this, where rather than just let him learn how to play baseball for a while, his swing has changed and his swing has changed and then his swing has changed. And so all of these raw athletes that the Angels have had, to me, look like they're in the box thinking, all right, so I got to swing like this now, rather than just like, all right, there's a guy on second, nobody's out. I really just need to put a ball in play here. Like I just need to put a ball in play here to move this runner over in this situation. And like I'm going to shorten up with 2 strikes. Like they're just not learning how to play intuitive baseball. Baseball is just such a complex game that they should, in my opinion, just worry about that for a while. And then if they're not succeeding for one reason or another, once that foundation has been laid and they're at AA or whatever, then change their swing. Because then the other stuff is already baked in. They don't have to worry about, they're comfortable in the baseball playing environment. And now change their swing. Rather than the other way around. Like I just don't want Jordan Adams to get to AA and then be taught situational baseball. So I think Jahmai is in that bucket where they found something that worked with him towards the end. 2019 Fall League, I thought that it was the right fit. They simplified things and let just his natural feel for contact rule, right? This is a guy who looked like a 6-bat almost instantaneously in the AZL after he was drafted. He went from looking like a raw high schooler to, hey, this is a guy who's got a 6-bat. And then the swing changed a lot to try to coax more power out of that, and that kind of went away. And so now it's very simple with the front foot. Just guide the bat head to the ball, let your natural strength and bat speed sort of dictate how much power comes. And I think it's going to be a lot of doubles power, a lot of contact. His approach has been mixed in the past, so maybe it's on the lower end of OBP. But I think you're looking at above average pop for a middle infielder, although he's probably the type of guy who you don't want on the field late in games. Like he's not a very good defensive second baseman. He'll make some effort and athleticism-based plays, but and he's gotten a lot better around the bag, but his hands are still not very good. So, I think he's going to be a flawed player, but definitely a core role player, the type of guy who and Orioles fans will love him. Like he's such a wonderful kid who plays really hard and is a lot of fun to watch.
So we get a lot of feedback from our fans about prospect fatigue sometimes. And one of the guys that it really surrounds is Ryan McKenna. And I was surprised to see him 7th on your list, and your report on him was pretty positive. So what sort of background do you have on McKenna that makes you think that he's going to be a guy who could really click?
Yeah, so I've got McKenna in the 45 future value tier, and I think he's a relatively lower variance guy. So that, to me, that's a good role player. So like that's Manny Margot, that's Freddie Galvis, the 1.5-ish WAR type guys who play an integral part on your team, play a bunch of different defensive positions, but aren't necessarily a clean everyday player the way I think, like Ryan Mountcastle is going to be or whatever. So McKenna, he's got sneaky pop to right center. There's something about the way his swing works that really lets him pepper that opposite field gap. And I think then his speed takes over. And so this is a guy who I think is going to have, even though he's not going to have like crazy high exit velos, I think he's going to hit for some sneaky doubles and triples power just because of how fast he is and sort of the way his swing puts balls into play. And then the speed and the defensive component, I think are going to be a valuable piece of that too. So I have him as a version of the fourth outfielder. There are a couple different versions of that. There might be a better way of describing it. Like Matt Joyce and Seth Smith are the, hey, I hit left-handed and I have power version of this, where they're going to have to sit some of the time. Josh Reddick's in that bucket too, where like they have to sit some of the time against some of these tough lefties. And so they're not like obvious to meet the definition of an everyday player, but they play a ton because most of the pitching population is right-handed. And so they're going to like be in the middle of your lineup a lot of the time. And McKenna is the inverse of that, where he's right-handed, but he can really fly and play center field. There's going to be some sneaky power there too. So he'll probably sit sometimes against, right-handed pitchers, or if you got a sinker baller on the hill that day, then you don't need the 7-runner in the outfield that day. So you can, have someone who is more offense forward playing an outfield position that day rather than McKenna. And so he's also not the definition of an everyday guy, but he's something close to it. He's definitely an integral role player type. And that's how I define that, that lower variance 45 future value type of guy. That's the role that type of guy plays.
And another guy along those lines, I think a little bit lower on the list, is Caden Grenier, who I think Orioles fans have just forgotten exists, but he's still hanging in there around the 20s on your list.
Yeah. Grenier is another one where how much, and the highest profile version of this was Mackenzie Gore, right? Where you go, all right, so how much do I read into the team's handling of them during this time? So he wasn't a guy who was like invited to the alt site or instructs or anything, right? So what does that say about the org and their opinion of him? Like, you're sort of making an inference there. And I think that it's logical to do that, but you don't really know. Grenier is really interesting. I saw him in high school. He went to Vegas area high school. I think he went to Bishop Gorman, and was clearly tooled up, had some power, could really run, could play shortstop. And then playing at Oregon State is very seductive, right? And he's good enough defensively that Nick Madrigal, who doesn't have the left side arm strength in a vacuum, but could sure as hell play college shortstop. Madrigal moved from shortstop to second base at Oregon State because of Grenier. And then Grenier's swing is just weird. And it doesn't really work. And there's definitely power there. And if you can get him to swing at the right stuff to the point where he's making contact and only swinging at stuff where he can, impact it with power, you narrow his approach in that way, then maybe it works in some kind of way. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of strikeouts there, and maybe too many strikeouts.
Yeah. Another guy that I think a lot of Orioles fans are excited to watch when we finally get the opportunity to watch minor league baseball again is Terrin Vavra, who you had pretty high on your list. Three of us all love the guy. His numbers are just kind of off the charts in small sample size, of course, but you have his ETA at 2022, despite that lack of real high level experience. What makes him a fast riser in your eyes, and why should Orioles fans be excited about what Vavra brings to the organization?
Yeah, most of my ETAs are just derived from the 40-man timeline. So that Rule 5 draft timeline comes up in November and then early December. And then the next year is almost always when I just have their ETA. But yeah, Vavra is the type of player who I'm just more likely in a heuristic way be in on. I love these lefty hitting multi-positional infielders with feel for contact. I just think that feel for contact is the most important thing. And that if you're a lefty stick who can play all over the infield, then you're very, very likely to play some sort of big league role. And even if it takes a little bit of time for it to develop, even if you don't have a whole lot of power, you end up doing like the Eric Sogard thing, where there are some years where you are running maybe a little bit higher of a BABIP than you should be, and you're hitting like 315 or something like that. So Vavra is a really athletic lefty stick. His second base for me. I think he'll probably play some third base too. Not really a shortstop, but maybe in an emergencies type situation. But yeah, I think that those guys who can hit are the types of guys who I'm going to bet on. And all the college players in his position are sort of behind the developmental 8 ball. They're the types of guys who probably would have been tested at AA at some point during 2020, and then thinking about them as being a year away wouldn't feel far, like a branch too far or whatever. It would feel more correct. But a lot of these college hitters from the last two drafts, well, 19 especially, and 18, but especially the 2019 college guys who, come out and they're going to be 23 this year, and a lot of them haven't played above A ball just because we missed the 2020 season. I think a lot of those guys would have run it up to high A, double A.
All right. So should I ask for a refund on the Yusniel Diaz jersey I just ordered, or does he still have a chance to make his mark as the centerpiece in the Manny Machado trade?
He's hard.
This is probably the most discussed point of your list, I think, among Orioles fans.
Yeah, he's one where ultimately I felt it came time to make a call on what he was going to be, and I just took the under. There are definitely things about him I've seen him do, and I've been watching this guy for a long time, right? I'm just here in Arizona, so I saw a ton of him with LA before he got traded. And he was really, really performing for his age at every level, basically the whole time until 2019 a little bit, right? There's, again, something about the way his swing works that I think has limited utility throughout the zone where he can get beat. And there's less margin for error for a guy like that who's going to play a corner outfield spot than for someone who can actually play center field. So if you told me that he and McKenna, albeit for different reasons, right? Diaz has more raw juice than McKenna does. But if you told me that they were going to produce roughly similar stats, even though it was happening in different ways, right? McKenna's gap power and then run like hell. And, oh, look, I've got 30 doubles. And Diaz is, I have actual power. Here are my 30 doubles. And then McKenna can actually play center field and Diaz cannot. And Diaz has been hurt a bunch too, and that also caused me to round down a little bit. But you can see how there's if you're looking at it this way, which is the way I looked at it, that there should be some daylight between those two guys. And then the injury stuff really caused me to round down on Yusniel even more than towards the end. But there are people in baseball who just think he's a 50. That you mentioned prospect fatigue before, that they just think the way that this guy performed at his level, he feels like a pretty safe everyday corner outfielder to me. And there are people in baseball who feel that way. And I'm just not one of them.
And go ahead, Nick.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, for some reason, Keegan Aiken isn't on the list, and perhaps he's not considered eligible, but for the sake of argument, where would he fit in if he was? And do you think he can stick in the rotation?
Yeah, I do. So I did go back and count his service time days, and I guess I came up with 43 days on this second count. At one point, I must have counted more than 45. He is on the board, has a tab for everybody who graduated rookie status in 2020. So if people go to Fangraphs and find the board and click on the far right tab, the seasonal tab, there's a drop down in there that just says 2020 graduates, and Keegan Aiken is on there. And all the Orioles prospects who graduated, Austin Hayes was the only other one, in 2020 are on that list. And yeah, I've got Aiken again as a 45. I had renewed confidence in him being able to consistently back foot that breaking ball to right-handed hitters based on what I saw in 2020. It was always a velo and changeup lefty for me as an amateur and then as a prospect, and then watching him in the big leagues. I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, this guy's breaking ball utility is better than I thought. And so I slid him up into that 45 future value tier. I know he got touched up a little bit today, and I know he's had a hard time throwing strikes in general so far this spring, but he's a Husky boy. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time for those guys to come into camp and shake off the off-season rust. So I'd be okay with that. I still just love his left-handed stuff and think he's going to be a core part of any kind of pitching staff that you guys have moving forward. But yeah, he'd be in that 45 future value tier on the Orioles list, somewhere in that mix with like Kramer and who's the other one I have in that mix?
Is it Bauman?
Like Bauman, yeah. And then you're just kind of picking who do you like? Bauman's sort of been hurt, but has the best pure stuff of those three guys. Kramer's the most stable of the group. And Aiken is the one who had, 2020 success, and maybe that makes you feel a little more confident in him. It's sort of, take your pick of that group.
Cool.
Nice. So two righties on the flip side of that, further down your list, that really struggled in 2019, last time we saw them. But Blaine Knight and Brendan Hanafy. Knight's strikeout numbers just not there. Walks were through the roof. Really bad year in Frederick. Same thing with Hanafy, not a strikeout guy, but the walks were up. He really struggled in Frederick as well. We've talked about before on a previous episode how we see a lot of Orioles pitchers kind of struggle a little bit when they get to Frederick, but guys like Alex Wells, when they got to Bowie, he really turned things around compared to that year in Frederick. Do you see any hope with either Knight or Hanafy turning things around in 2021?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one of those sneaky things that the people focused on a sole team know about the developmental trajectory of their guys that, it kind of eludes most of us doing the national thing, right? It's a very, very specific thing. So I'm glad to have learned that. But yeah, the Hanafy thing is tough. There wasn't a whole lot of support to even keep him on the list at all. I know there that you're betting on frame, arm strength, athleticism, right? And see what happens from there. I'm inclined to do that continuously. But that's still where things are with Hanafy, and that's where they've been for kind of a while now. So starting to lose some optimism there, but obviously he's still around and on the list. And then Knight is another interesting one because there was a year when he was draft eligible and then just didn't get picked because the stuff was up and down. He really can only pitch it in out of the bullpen for me. Part of the problem with him in Arkansas was that he wouldn't hold his stuff deep into games, and he sure wouldn't hold his command deep into games. So I like him more as a middle inning, really let it rip at 93 to 96 with a plus slider type guy. And I think that if they make that type of move, that maybe you'll see him shoot up, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to do that just to get him to start performing. At some point, you still want to say, give this guy as many reps as he can, try every bit as much as he can to make him be a starter. And you want to try to refine. If you can find a third pitch in there, then you want to try to do that. And so letting a guy start and giving him 4 or 5 innings to do that is much more, you're much more likely for him to do something unexpected and develop than if you're like, look, we just think you're a reliever, so just do that. So I get how they've handled him, but ultimately I think that the role there is probably an up-down relief type guy, an option year reliever.
Nice.
I'll point our listeners to your report on Hanafy because I love this line in your report. His delivery is odd. After his hands break, Hanafy holds the ball out and up above his head like a waiter carrying a tray. Then his stride and arm stroke are both very short. I love the way you wrote that, Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, you're trying to, I don't know. I write up 2,000 guys every year, so trying to do some stuff.
Yeah. I will note, I've watched Hanafy. I live in the same town as him. Listeners of our show know he's my guy. He's been working out here in town all summer. I will say there was a slight velo uptick according to recent info, and a lot of work on that secondaries. So hopefully there's something there with him.
Yeah, it's nice to see guys like that develop. And, you identify a guy like this when we did sort of as a prospect writing populace, right? Basically, he goes to Aberdeen in 2017 and has a 2.7 ERA. And then I think he performed really well the next year and just wasn't striking anybody out. And at that point, you're like, all right, look, this guy definitely has components. And it's just about making some of the secondary stuff work, and it just hasn't. And it just matters more as you get to the upper levels.
Yeah.
Going over the hitters for a moment, there's been a lot of talk this spring about Tyler Nevin's swing and how the Orioles are working with him, and it seems like the goal is to try to get a little bit more power production out of him. Do you think they're ultimately going to be able to do what the Rockies couldn't and get more power out of Tyler Nevin?
I think maybe. I did hear a story from someone with the org while I was putting the list together that was to the effect said that the Rockies wanted him to use the whole field in a way that they almost discouraged him from pulling the baseball during BP and, during live work and stuff like that. Like it wasn't a thing that they encouraged him to do, and we're actually actively discouraging him from doing. So, as far as the philosophical piece of this that I am not sure about yet is, do you want people to pull the baseball all the time? I know sometimes that you've got look, your exit velos are way better when you pull the ball, but if you start guys doing that from day one, then you're missing out on some of the great natural hitters like Miguel Cabrera. Like, you would never want to tell Miguel Cabrera, hey dude, just pull it all the time. Right? Like, that part of the reason that guy developed into one of the best hitters of the last 20 years is because he was groomed to do this all fields thing, and then developed through physical growth the power to do damage everywhere. And he became an elite hitter because of that. And I don't think I'd want to prevent. I'd be worried that encouraging people to pull the ball more often from day one might, you might miss a guy like that because you don't allow him to develop into that. And that's not the case with Nevin, right? Like, he's older. So I think it's possible, right? Based on what we know about what seemed not to be happening in Colorado, if he can pull the ball some more situationally, then absolutely, maybe there's more juice in there. And I think he's going to need it because he's probably going to play a lot of first base.
Side note, what the hell are the Rockies doing?
Right. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because somebody with the Denver Post is supposed to call me tomorrow to talk about exactly that. I don't know. But from my perspective, that org is strange just because, I'm on the backfields a lot. And when you have kids who have the same number and your rosters that are posted on your backfields aren't always updated, and the names are on the back of the jerseys, and it's hard to get schedules and probable pitchers out of people on your staff, it really makes my job hard. And so, and the job of the scouts here humping the backfields as well, who cover the Rockies, they don't want to be blindsided. I asked the guy who covered the Rockies all last week. I was like, hey, do they have a B game coming up here this week? And he was like, oh, I really don't know. And then they did. I would have liked to have been there, but it just wasn't a thing that was known. So it was just a thing that some of the Diamondbacks beat writers stumbled on, and were like, hey, there's a B game going on in the Rockies backfield. And I was like, oh shit, I should have been there. But yeah, it's a weird org. Some of the stuff they do, I think, is really great. And some of the stuff that they do is not good. And yeah, it's weird. I don't know what to really think about them right now, but I should figure that out before tomorrow.
Another outfielder that I'm interested in, he's a guy that I was excited to watch 2019, but having a newborn right after short season ball started, not a lot of time to get out to Aberdeen.
Well, congrats though.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, the Aberdeen camera is kind of like somebody has a drone over top of the field, so you have no idea what's really happening on those games. But Kyle Stowers, you have him pretty high among outfielders in this organization. And I think he gets overlooked just because the Orioles have a pretty solid group of outfielders right now at the major league level. Mountcastle Hayes, the resurgence of Mullins, we'll see what happens there. But
yeah,
Santander, and then you have Kershaw and Diaz, but you have Kyle Stowers right behind them. I mean, other than his just extreme raw power, what is there to like about Stowers, what he brings?
I just love how crazy athletic his swing is. He's just got – his swing is just so athletic. And – so to see that, especially to see that on a college field, was different. And so, yeah, I'm in on that. That's basically it. He just has, when you watch Cody Bellinger swing, when you watch anyone who has that explosive rotational ability where they're taking that giant stride, it just takes a rare sort of athlete to be able to do that. And there's maybe not the elite rotational speed, the bat speed isn't as goofy as someone like Bellinger or like Acuna or Javi Baez or some of these other guys who have these really rotational swings. But the fact that he can keep a swing like that relatively under control, and I just love guys with that really long stride. I like guys who can adjust they're really adjusting the depth of their barrel by adjusting the length of their swings or the length of their stride. So, the longer stride you take, the lower your barrel is going to traverse the zone. And so some of those guys, I think Stowers can do this can adjust their swing in that way, sort of mid stride. And so, I just think he's a lefty bat who's going to hit for a ton of power. There are going to be some strikeouts, but yeah, he's in that bucket too, where it's like there's more variance there. So I think there's a little bit more ceiling, and maybe he is just eventually like a true everyday player. I think the talent for that is there, but he's also in that like 45 bucket where, it's that Seth Smith, Matt Joyce type of thing. Like, yeah, that's pretty reasonable to expect this guy to come up, mash right-handed pitching, which just makes up most of the pitching population, and play, a 2/3 of a platoon sort of situation. And even Jock Peterson is like the high-end version of this, right? Where he's not really playing against lefties, but still is hitting like 25 bombs a year just because he has so much power and is put in the right positions to succeed.
Focusing for a minute on two guys that have gotten a lot of hype really since last fall, and that's Jordan Westburg and Gunnar Henderson. There's a lot of focus on the bats with those guys, but do you see either one of them sticking at shortstop?
No. I'm still kind of stingy in the way I think about shortstops, right? But if it were my ball club, like Paul DeYoung wouldn't play shortstop for me, but he's played shortstop. So Westburg, if you're going to pick a guy, it's probably Westburg, who has the better chance of the two to stay there. But no, I don't think so. I think Henderson, I bet, could be a very good defensive third baseman. I'm more inclined to think that Westburg ends up playing second base left field, but he's the one of the two who, if I'm going to bet on a guy to stick there and be a 4 defender, then it's probably him.
Do you think the Orioles have enough depth behind Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall to fill out a rotation on a contending team, or do you think they'll eventually need to acquire at least a mid-rotation starter outside of the organization?
I think that Grayson is going to be a real dude. His delivery still kind of scares me, just because of how long the arm action is. And Hall is this way too. At least the last I saw him, his arm action was pretty long. And so Hall, I think, will either be in that 5 and dive role where he's like Blake Snell, where he throws like 5 innings and that's kind of it. Just because he doesn't work efficiently enough. And so, I think that pitching depth in general is a huge, huge part of having a contending roster, and that there's always attrition. So you can look at Lucas Giolito's career. Was like, wow, look at this guy. He's one of the best prospects in baseball. And then he sucked. And now he's great again because they shortened his arm action. And so there's going to be some of this with all of the guys that they have in the system. And some of them are just going to fall away the way some of those Royals prospects kind of fell away. They won a World Series anyway, but a bunch of those guys just didn't really pan out. So, there's always going to be attrition on the pitching side, which makes the depth piece important. And so, yes, I absolutely think that they're going to need way, 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 way more guys than just Grayson and DL Hall. I think that you're hoping that one or two of Aiken, Bauman, Kramer stick as your 4th starter type of guy. You're hoping that one of Isaac Matson and Peak and Brnovich and Bradish work out. You're hoping that one of like Alex Wells has some sneaky Kyle Hendricks stuff going on, or Dallas Keuchel, right? And you're rebuilding heavy. And this guy can eat innings, and maybe by giving him the opportunity to do that, you run into a guy who can play that sort of long-term role and totally exceed your expectations. You have so many opportunities to give guys the chance to do that because of the rebuild. So depth is going to be hugely, hugely important. And some of them will just, be born of refining themselves at the big league level through sheer opportunity. And I would guess that three or four of the prospects in the system are part of the next competitive Orioles big league rotation. And that, 2 of them, just for the sake of depth, probably are not. One of those 2 is probably like a big name guy, like a go get Darvish or go get Musgrove or go get Lance Lynn type of guy who the org is going to have to consolidate prospects to trade for.
All right, and more on the pitching side, I saw there was no mention of Adam Stauffer or any of the arms from the 2019 draft class that the Orioles actually selected. In the other prospects of note, are they not of note, or is it just there's not enough to go off of since 2020 was missed?
Yeah, you could include Stauffer's like 90-94 with some backspin. So yeah, like typically for me, the guys who end up on the back end of the list, or the prospects who get drafted after round 3 basically typically do not end up on the list. And maybe they're in the honorable mention section and are more likely to be if I've seen them in person at any point, which is just like not the case with a lot of the Orioles guys. So yeah, like certainly again, the Orioles seem very, very interested in all of these underlying traits, flat angled back spinning fastballs. And then they just apply dev to all of them. And then some of them will spike and some of them will not. And so, yeah, Stauffer's absolutely in that group of guys who there's, fringy arm strength here. But again, you can make velocity seemingly as consistently as you can do anything else with pitchers and their development now. You can actually make them throw harder. Like we just have programs in place now where that actually happens, and it didn't used to. So maybe finding all these underlying traits is really the way to go, and then get them to throw harder. And he is also just sort of in that bucket.
Cool.
Nice. So I guess we're kind of close up here with looking at the draft. Enjoy your work on the draft prospect side of things too. This year has kind of been the first year that I've enjoyed really diving into just watch as much college baseball as possible. And it's been awesome to see a lot of these non-conference games. But conference play is getting ready to ramp up here in a few weeks. Who should Orioles fans pay attention to as college baseball really gets underway here at pick number 5? Who are some guys that you really like that stand out that could be in an Orioles uniform in a few years?
So the things that Orioles fans want to keep in mind is how the team behaved in last year's draft. So while it's even if you pick 2 or 3, the answer is not to just pay attention to the Vanderbilt arms or Matt McClain and that's it, or know who Jordan Lawler is. The answer is to think about the groups of players, like think about the overslot prep arms who might be in the 3rd round and stuff like that. So there's a wide swath of players that Orioles fans should be caring about here. If I'm going to give Orioles fans a couple of teams to watch, you should be watching Mississippi State, who has 3 pitchers, Eric Sarantola, Christian McLeod. You've got Will Bednar there. You've got Logan Tanner, the catcher, Logan Allen. No, Tanner Allen. There's a Tanner Allen and a Logan Allen and a Logan Tanner. There are a bunch of Logan Allens. But anyway, the Mississippi State's got a catcher for 2 years from now. Like Mississippi State's just loaded. Watch Mississippi State. And any of those guys, especially in the comp round and stuff, right? Do you guys have a sandwich round pick this year?
I will look that up real quick. Yeah.
But yeah, if you look at what they did last year, right? They diversified. They cut a deal with a high probability college bat with their first pick with Kjerstad, which is sort of what the Cubs did with Kyle Schwarber, right? And then the Cubs got Dylan Cease and a couple other high school arms who you don't know about, but they got a bunch of other like $1 million high school arms, Justin Steele and Carson Sands and stuff. And then one of them hit, Cease. And they got Schwarber, and they were able to do that with the other guys because they cut with Schwarber. So I would look for Baltimore to do that. So know about that whole fat middle of the top 10. Right? If Baltimore looks at all those guys and sees roughly the same player, then they're probably going to draft the guy who's going to take the lowest bonus. And so then the thing to pay attention to in the mock drafts is which of that type of guy is projected in the mock drafts that you trust and closer to the date. Like, don't go looking at mock drafts now. They're just clickbait now. Wait until late April or May. And maybe not even then right now, because remember the draft isn't until July this year, right? So, but like with Kjerstad, of all those names that were likely to go in that top 10 mix on the mock drafts, he's the one who didn't have a home until 12 or 14 or whatever in a lot of the rumors. And so that's the one who he has incentive to take the biggest cut of that bonus slot, because it's still more than he'd make going 10 or 12 or wherever he was next likely to go. But it's not that way for the guy who's going to go 6th or 7th. Like, he'll only take a slot at 6 or 7 where he's likely to go. So pay attention to that stuff. And then who are some of the other college teams that, no comp round pick for you guys this year, huh? So you pick at 5 and then at 41. Then like the other ones to watch Ty Madden at Texas if you can. Texas is kind of tough to watch because they're on that Longhorn network that like nobody has. So that's a really tough one. But Ty Madden is an interesting one to watch. Who are some of the other teams that are going to be interesting? Here, Louisville, Henry Davis at Louisville, a catcher with huge power. Boston College has two guys you're going to want to watch too. Sal Frelick, the center fielder. I really like him. And Cody Morissette, or I've heard it pronounced Morissette as well, who had a slow start and then was 3 for 4 with 2 bombs the other day. Those are the colleges with a lot of the first-round hitters. And some of the other first-round hitters we don't even really know about yet. They're just breaking out now because they didn't have their 2020 sophomore year to set that foundation of performance the way Rutschman did. Go look at Rutschman's freshman year. His statistics are not good. He laid the foundation to be 1-1 as a sophomore. And then he came out and was the best guy already and then reinforced it his whole junior year. We don't have a foundation of a sophomore year for anybody right now because we only had those 4 weeks. And so, we had fall practice and stuff like that too, but it's not a thing that you can go, hey, look at Wes Clark at South Carolina, who's slugging 1,200 or something right now, which he is. And actually, as I split here, I'm going to go watch South Carolina versus the Citadel. But yeah, like, so there's a whole group of guys who we don't even really know about yet. They're just starting to break out. That's not someone who I think they take at 5, but clearly they gave $1 million to Servideo, who was a version of this last year, right? He didn't really play a whole lot at Ole Miss because there were other guys in front of him. And then he comes out, plays shortstop, looks good, and he raked for a month before the shutdown. And so clearly the Orioles are paying attention to and willing to buy into some of these types of guys. And so now is the time for Orioles fans to, boy, I really wish there was like a leaderboard of college statistics. That would sure be nice if Fangraphs had that. Appleman, if you're watching this, like, let's go. But, and like D1baseball.com has a leaderboard, but it's not like the Fangraphs leaderboards where we'd calculate the walk rate and the ISO for you and all that stuff. Like you have to do all that stuff by hand, which I have, and it's pain. But so, yeah, there are all sorts of guys who haven't broken out yet.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Can you tell our listeners where they can check out your work and what's coming up at Fangraphs?
So, yeah, so I'm still cranking out team lists. Now that Kevin is around, hopefully that will go a little bit more quickly here towards the very end. So check out my team list at the site if you're interested in prospects beyond just the Orioles. We'll have draft content as well. Kevin and I see a bunch of players and then watch a bunch of TV over the weekend and write up notes. And so that comes out typically about once a week. So that's what our regular draft coverage looks like right now. And then I wrote a book last year called Future Value that, if you're listening to me talk and you think, this guy seems like he's not an idiot, you might like the book because it really goes into a lot of how over the course of being in baseball for the last, this will be my 13th season in baseball, 13th or 14th season in baseball. I was an intern for the Phillies AAA affiliate when I was 18 or 19 and have been in the game in some capacity since then. And it's Kylie McDaniel of ESPN and I wrote this book together where we just sort of dump all of the best practices stuff that we have learned and thought about during our time doing this. It's all in Future Value. And it does sort of predict the thing that has already started to happen at an accelerated rate where scouting shifts to this video data thing and looks very, very different than it did even just 5 years ago. And is not super great for scouts from a labor perspective. And all that stuff is sort of baked into Future Value, which people can find on Amazon or whatever. I think there's a paperback that'll come out later this year. So I assume the book is done okay. And then, yeah, so that those are the things that if I get to plug, then I would. And I thank you guys for having me on. I know that it's a fledgling podcast. So good luck to you guys. And I appreciate you thinking highly enough of the work to have me on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't thank you enough for giving us so much time.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Yep. Thank you so much, Eric. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at BSL on the Verge. Check out BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com for the latest Orioles, Ravens, Terps content. And be sure to hop on the message board. Thanks again to Eric for being on. For Nick Stevens and Bob Phelan, this has been Zach Spedden. You've been listening to On the Verge.
Well,
Well. Shopping for a car?
Yep. Carvana made financing a car as smooth as can be.
Oh, yeah?
I got pre-qualified instantly and had real terms personalized just for me.
Doesn't get much smoother than that.
Well, I got to browse thousands of car options on Carvana, all within my budget.
Doesn't get much smoother than that.
It does. I actually wanted a car that seemed out of my range, but I was able to add a cosigner and found my dream car.
It doesn't get much...
Oh, it gets smoother. It's getting delivered tomorrow.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get pre-qualified today.